that the world was far more complicated than they had ever dreamed. They did not waver. They learned that the fight against smog was not a sprint but a marathon, and that every contribution, no matter how small, mattered. They learned that the most profound change often started with the simplest intention. One evening, as they looked out over the city from the balcony of their hotel, the lights of Washington shimmering like a sea of stars below them, Jed spoke softly. "We have seen much and we have learned much. And while we may not have saved the world in the way we first thought, we have planted a seed. And that, my kin, is a fine thing." Granny nodded, her eyes bright with reflection. "We have shown them, Jed. We have shown them that you do not need to be a politician or a rich man to stand up for what you believe in. We have shown them that a little bit of goodness can go a long way." Ellie Mae reached out and took Jed's hand, a small, contented smile on her face. "And we have kept our critters happy." Jethro, looking up from his diagrams, grinned. "And I have figured out that steam is good, but electricity might just be better." Jed laughed, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to fill the night air. "And so, the journey continues. Tomorrow we start again. Because there is always more work to be done, and as long as we have each other, we have all the strength we need." The city went on, its rhythms continuing unabated, but for the family from the mountains, the world had shifted. They were no longer just observers. They were participants. They were a part of the great tapestry of the nation, and they understood that their role, however small it might seem, was a vital thread in the whole. They were the Beverly Hillbillies, and they were, in their own way, shaping the future of their country. As they drifted off to sleep, they felt a sense of peace that only comes from knowing you have done your best. They were far from the cabin in the Ozarks, but in their dreams they were back on the porch, the air smelling of pine, the world quiet and still, and everything exactly as it should be. They were ready for whatever tomorrow might bring, for they had found their place in the world, and they were content to live it one day at a time, with all the courage and kindness that dwelt within them. The next morning brought a fresh wave of challenges, but with it came a renewed sense of vigor. They were no longer the wide-eyed newcomers who arrived in the city days before. They were now seasoned navigators of the urban landscape. They knew which offices to visit, which people to talk to, and how to present their vision in a way that resonated with the people who held the power to make a difference. Jed found himself sitting in a high-backed chair in a room that felt 1,000 miles away from the mountains. He was speaking to a group of officials who were used to numbers, to charts, and to the cold, hard reality of the bottom line. But as he spoke, he used the only language he knew, the language of the earth, the language of the people, and the language of the heart. He spoke of the beauty of the valleys, the importance of clean air, and the responsibility that each generation bore to the next. The officials, hardened by years of political maneuvering, found themselves listening. There was something about the simple, honest conviction of this man that broke through their defenses. He was not asking for a favor. He was presenting a truth. And in a room filled with complexity, truth was a rare and precious commodity. Granny, meanwhile, was working her own brand of magic. She had become a regular at the local community centers, where she helped teach families the value of simple, homegrown food and the importance of supporting one another. Her presence was a reminder that the health of a nation was rooted in the health of its families. She had become a bridge between the city and the country, showing everyone who met her that no matter where you lived, the values that truly mattered were the same. Ellie Mae's impact continued to grow. She had successfully lobbied for a small, green space in the heart of the city, a place where children could come to learn about animals and nature. It was a modest project, but it was a place where life could thrive, a little oasis in the midst of the bustle. It was a living, breathing testament to her belief that nature and civilization could coexist if only we cared enough to make the space. Jethro, having abandoned the steam engine, was now fully immersed in the world of electrical engineering. He had become a protege of a local university professor who was genuinely impressed by his raw, innate talent. He spent his days in the laboratory, surrounded by wires, circuits, and the glow of computer screens, his mind racing with possibilities. He was no longer just a boy from the mountains, he was a scientist in the making, and the future seemed to stretch out before him with endless promise. As for honest John, he found himself caught in the tide of the family's momentum. He had started with selfish intentions, but the genuine goodness of the Clampetts had a way of wearing down even the most hardened of schemers. He found himself acting in ways he never would have imagined, driven not by the lure of profit, but by the infectious enthusiasm of his kin. He was, in a very real sense, being transformed by the very people he had set out to exploit. The story of the Clampetts became the story of the city itself, a story of transformation, of growth, and of the enduring power of the human spirit. They had come to Washington with a simple mission, and they ended up leaving a legacy that reached far beyond anything they had ever anticipated. They had touched lives, they had opened doors, and they had reminded a nation that the most important progress often happened in the quietest, most unexpected ways. When they finally decided that it was time to return to their home in the mountains, there was a sense of accomplishment that was palpable. They had done what they came to do and more. They had seen the world, and they had seen how they could change it. But as they packed their things, there was also a sense of longing for the familiar, for the rhythm of the life they knew. Jed stood on the balcony one last time, looking out over the city. It was a vast, complex, and beautiful place, and it had been a part of their journey. But it was not their home. Their home was in the hills, where the air was clean, the birds sang, and the stars shone with a clarity that seemed to mock the artificial lights of the city. "We did good, Jed," Granny said, coming up beside him and placing a hand on his arm. "We did good." "Yes, Granny," Jed replied, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the city lights one last time. "We did good." The drive back to the mountains was a reflective one. They talked about the people they had met, the things they had learned, and the way the world felt different to them now. They had left the mountains as mountaineers, and they were returning as citizens of the world, their perspectives broadened and their hearts enriched. As the familiar silhouette of the hills rose up to meet them, they felt a sense of homecoming that was deeper than anything they had ever known. They were back, but they were changed. They were the same people, and yet they were not. They had grown, they had learned, and they had discovered that the mountains were not just a place to live. They were a place to draw strength from as they continued their journey through life. The cabin was waiting for them, the fire in the hearth ready to be lit, the world quiet and peaceful. As they stepped out of the truck, the smell of the earth, the rustle of the leaves, and the sound of the wind in the trees welcomed them home. They had traveled far, they had fought their battles, and they had returned with the knowledge that the greatest adventures were not the ones that took you far away, but the ones that brought you back home, changed, enriched, and ready to live your life to the fullest. Jed sat down on the porch and picked up his piece of hickory and his knife. The familiar rhythm began again, a steady, soothing sound that connected him to the earth. The smog was still out there, the world was still complex, and the challenges were still many. But as he looked out over the valley, he knew that they would be ready for whatever came next. Because they were the Clampetts, and they had learned that as long as they had each other, and as long as they had the truth in their hearts, they were capable of anything. And so, the story of the family from the hills continued, a quiet, steady rhythm in the heart of the world, a testament to the fact that goodness, like the air we breathe, is something that must be nurtured, protected, and shared